We're live. Oh my goodness. It's been so long. I think it's been 6 months since we've been in the bin, but we're going to fact check that. I'm excited to be back. Today we have a special guest. I don't think you could put apples in a bin without first putting trees in the ground. And you can't get trees without our friend here, Bennett Mayo from Mike and Brian's Nursery.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome, man. You said you've never done a podcast before.
It's my first time.
I've done a few. I'd like to think I'm okay at it, but it's a natural thing, just having a conversation. So Thank you for coming on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, so our audience for the show are mostly growers, but also customers of ours, as well as other people in the industry. So it's a really broad picture, and it's safe to assume that not all of them know about nurseries and grafting and rootstocks and stuff like that. So
All right.
you have a good opportunity to educate us all
That's what I'm here for.
on what you do.
Perfect.
So before we get started, your name is Bennett. I need to know who Mike and Brian are.
All right. So Mike and Brian's, Mike Argo and Brian Knobs, they started the nursery in the early 90s, around 1992 or so. So they were actually high school buddies, kind of went their separate ways for a while. Both were in farming. Mike was more into the grafting, and there was opportunities in the early 90s to grow trees. And actually, the very first customer of Mike and Brian's nursery was Kershaw.
Nice.
Yeah.
What'd they buy? Do you remember?
I think it was Red Delicious on M7.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and here we are.
Right on. Yeah. I know a couple of growers in our group obviously utilize you guys. You guys are pretty big. And you're just north of Zilla, right? Is it technically Wapato?
Yeah. So our main office is in Zilla, and then our fields are in Hera. That's where our cold room is.
Hera.
And,
Okay.
Yeah, north of Hera. It's Wapato zip code, but kind of Hera actual.
And how many acres is like your production area?
We've got about 400 acres that are in a rotation.
Wow.
Depending on the size of the crop, it could fluctuate between 100 and 200 acres per crop year. That's in production.
Wow. Okay. It's larger than I thought. I feel like you could probably get a lot of trees out of that.
There's a lot of trees. Yeah. It's a lot more dense than an orchard. So
Gotcha.
we plant about 15,000 trees per acre.
In terms of nurseries, like in our state, obviously there's a ton of apple trees and pear trees and cherries. Where do you guys stand in terms of like size for a commercial nursery?
We're probably moderate size. I think there's 2 to 3 other nurseries who might be bigger than us.
Okay. So you're up there.
Yeah, we're up there.
Okay. Sweet. So let's get into, I guess, what services a nursery provides for growers.
Okay. Yeah, so we provide trees to plant or reestablish new orchards in addition to any kind of replant needs that an orchard might have, where they have death due to disease or just normal tree death that happens. So we grow apples, cherries, and pears, primarily apples, and we're probably about 90% apples, 8 to 9% of cherries, and pears is a pretty small number. The pear industry is kind of shrinking,
Yeah.
and there's not a lot of demand for new plantings going on.
Right.
But we grow, approximately maybe 1 million trees per year, and that's shifted, and it's been higher, and then in this kind of downturn in the fruit industry, things are going down. Well, hopefully they come back up in a few years.
Hopefully.
But we provide 2-year finished trees. So a typical apple tree or nursery tree takes 2 years to grow. We also provide some 1-year trees where you kind of quicker turnaround for ordering. You can get, it's a little bit smaller of a tree, but you can kind of meet your needs a little bit faster. And then we provide kind of general consulting on what you should be planting, advice on how to plant them, things like that.
So when you say 1-year tree and 2-year tree, what is like the visual difference or like characteristic difference of those two?
Yeah, so a 2-year tree is going to be about 5 to 6 feet tall with branching from about 20 inches up, and the average caliper is about a 1/2 inch. A 1-year tree is probably going to be at the max 4 feet tall with very little branching, and the caliper is maybe 1/2 inch, more like 7/16.
And is there any yield difference at like once it's fully in production, say 5 years later? Is there a difference in quality or anything like that?
No, it's more about the size of the tree at the time of planting. Okay. So your 1-year tree, you're going to be a year behind as far as when you're going to come into production. But a lot of times what we're dealing with is a grower needs to plant this piece of land in this year, and he doesn't have 2 years to wait for the trees.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's generally advised to wait for the 2 year if you can,
Right.
assuming that it's going to be a stronger tree and have a higher chance of living.
Correct.
But if you can't, there's a solution for it.
Correct.
Interesting. Yep. Okay. Is that for like all variety or all rootstocks? Is that kind of?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, there's some growers are more comfortable or are comfortable with planting a smaller tree, and sometimes they're a little bit cheaper, so they're willing to take that savings there at the front end and spend a little more time with a tree.
What's a tree go for these days?
Probably average is about $8 a tree for an apple tree. Cherries are closer to 10.
Wow.
Pears are probably around 9.
Okay. So modern plantings are like 1,200 trees per acre. So
right.
It's when I first started 10 years ago, they said it was about $50,000 to plant an apple orchard, and now I feel like it's six figures easily.
Oh yeah, I've heard 50 to 80,000, and depending on who you talk to, that might not include the land that you had to buy.
Right. Yeah.
So,
and a lot of that is labor, obviously, irrigation and whatnot. But as you put more trees in each acre, obviously the cost of your total trees are going to go up too.
Right.
So,
yeah, the trees are an expensive part of planting, but it obviously is not the most expensive part.
Right.
So,
and now they're doing like all these trellises and stuff, and that stuff is so expensive.
Exactly.
And then shade cloth, optional.
Yep. Overhead cooling.
Yeah.
Yes.
There you go. And all of a sudden we're at $150,000.
Right.
Okay. So sweet. So I have seen the grafting process. You did a phenomenal demonstration. We had our largest customer come in. They brought a huge squad of their team out, and we like to do what we call the super fresh experience here, and where we educate our customers on everything from accounting to marketing to growing, packing, storing. It is like Apple 101.
Right.
And we slipped in a time slot for you this year.
Definitely.
And you crushed it. It was awesome. And that was kind of my first like hands-on, like actually seeing someone demonstrating how to graft. So maybe walk the audience through the high level, how you kind of graft trees.
Okay. Yeah. So the grafting process grafting in general covers propagating a tree, any kind of plant really, asexually. So you're taking two pieces of wood, putting them together, usually tape them up or something, and then they heal together and become one, basically.
Gotcha. You're merging two.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So in the nursery, we do that with the rootstock and then the scion variety. So we have roots and we bud on whatever variety we need to grow on that rootstock. So we have, Cosmic Crisp on Geneva 41 or Granny Smith on M9337. It's kind of you add all those different ingredients together. Grafting in the orchard is where you take an existing orchard and you can cut it down, graft in your new variety. So you can take an old Red Delicious orchard, stump it, and then graft it over to the newest variety. Whatever that might be, or some strain of a older variety, like more red gala or something like that. So basically you're taking that tree down to kind of the minimal size, about 18 inches off the ground, a stump. And we take the sign wood, which is usually about 6-inch pieces of wood, and we kind of make a cut on it so you can reveal the cambium layer on that piece of wood. And then you make a cut or a slice into the stump.
Does it matter where you put that cut or slice?
It does. It's more about the shape of it.
Okay.
Yeah, and then on the stump itself, we just put, if it's call it a 5-inch diameter stump, you put one every few inches around there so you can keep the whole stump alive. Because you're taking a piece of wood about 1/4 inch diameter and sticking it to a tree that's 5 inches across. So you want to keep the whole tree alive.
Gotcha.
To maintain that for the rest of its useful life.
Yeah, it's honestly fascinating because you hear about people grafting their orchard over, and they're leaving the roots and the root structures, everything's staying there. They're just cutting it, and it feels like replanting, but it's actually not. You're not putting something in the soil. You're just working the top of the stump.
Right. Yeah, it is an incredible process. I mean, it really feels like magic every time we do it, because you're just basically just laying two pieces of wood together and holding them there secure with tape, and then they grow together.
Does it ever fail? Like, assuming you do your job correctly and tape and everything's fine, do you ever see them just like not take?
It does happen. Our grafting crew is really good, and we have a pretty high take rate, but it happens. There's lots of environmental factors that could happen. We've had issues before where you graft and then you get a kind of a cold spell or some type of really cold morning, and it can damage the callus tissue that's growing between the two pieces of wood. So it creates a bunch of scar tissue, and it just takes that much longer to create more callus tissue, and that'll cause some grafts to fail.
So then if weather's a factor, then there's obviously a certain time frame where grafting is typically done.
Right.
Spring, I assume, right after
we
frost?
do all of our top working in the spring.
Okay.
Stuff in the nursery, which is we call budding, which is still just grafting, but we've taken a much smaller piece of wood, green wood, onto green rather than dormant. We do that in the fall.
Gotcha. So you, in that excellent explanation, you threw out a bunch of rootstock names. Why are there so many different rootstocks? And follow up to that, how do you pair it with the right variety? Grannies, cosmics, or honeys, or whatever it is.
Right. Well, there's probably 20 to 30 rootstocks out there that are commercially available and utilized. And there's probably double that of ones that have kind of gone by the wayside.
Wow.
And, basically at the beginning of the apple industry, however, hundreds of years ago, everything was planted by seed.
Right.
And so I'm sure you know, but when you take a seed out of an apple and plant it, you're not going to get the same apple.
Right.
So people would graft those, they would plant the seeds and they would graft them over to the variety they wanted, because grafting's been around for thousands of years, so they knew that was a viable way to.
So they would just take a seed, throw it in the ground, wait for it to become a root stock, basically, and then graft it to what they wanted.
Right.
Okay.
But because you never get the same apple with each seed, you also don't get the same behavior out of each seed. So when you're using it as the rootstock of your variety, some of them are going to be disease susceptible, some will be resistant, some are not. Drought resistant, things like that. So there was a push hundreds of years ago to create a rootstock that will be consistent, just like the variety is.
Yeah.
You always want Granny Smith in your Granny Smith block, but you want all the trees to perform the same way. So you got to have the same rootstock for each of the varieties.
Man, that's interesting. It's so complex.
It is. So in the same way they breed for apple varieties, they breed the same way for rootstock. So you're looking for disease resistance, drought resistance. You want it to be acceptable in the kind of soil you're planting, and ideally acceptable in most soil types, whether it's sandy or rocky soil or things like that.
So that's a great point. So would you say you have a Honeycrisp orchard in Cowichy and a Honeycrisp orchard in Mattawa? Would you put a different rootstock on those orchards?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the other portion of the rootstock discussion is the size of the tree it grows. So a seedling tree grows a full-size apple tree, which can be 40 to 50 feet tall. It's very vigorous. And it's really hard to control for size. And hard to harvest. Right. And they take a very long time to come into production. It wouldn't be uncommon for a tree on a seedling to maybe take 5 to 10 years to be in full production. Okay. And with the advent of the rootstock development process, we were able to create dwarfing rootstocks, which are size limited, which also generates or causes it to produce fruit earlier. So now we're growing rootstocks now that are 30% of a seedling size. So they're going to generally grow about 10 to 12 feet tall, and they're going to produce fruit in the second or third year. It'll take up to 5 years to be fully productive, but you can get a viable crop off it in the third year. So were you guys involved in the launch of Cosmics? We are a licensed nursery for them, so we're kind of, in a way, okay. I was just thinking about how your industry had to scale for that launch, because there's so many trees in the ground now, and you're talking about growing rootstocks. Like, that seems difficult to match that demand. Right. How long does it take to grow a rootstock? So rootstocks are grown in layering beds. And so, where normally you'd grow a tree, you plant a root and you grow a tree there. Layering beds are where you take a rootstock and you lay it down underneath and you staple it to the ground and you put sawdust over it. And then it sends up suckers off that root. And because they're under the sawdust, they send out roots. And so you get this plant that's growing, 12 to 24 inches tall, but it's underground about half of that height of it. And you go through with an undercutter and you can pull that root out of the ground. And so they grow those. A lot of nurseries grow their own. We don't grow our own. We source most of ours from nurseries that do that specifically down in the Willamette Valley. But they can grow those. Trying to think of the density per acre, but it's quite high. It looks like maybe something akin to like a blueberry hill, but it's going to be a lot more dense. It's going to look like a solid hedge of apples, apple leaves out there.
Man, it's so complex. So back to rootstocks and their characteristics. Is there like a Michael Jordan of rootstocks that does it all? Like shoots the threes, dunks from the free throw?
Not yet.
Not yet?
That's why there's so many.
Are you working on it?
Everybody is. There's some that people have just spent so much time and effort in figuring out the best way to grow a certain rootstock where they kind of treat it that way. Mm-hmm. And that works. There's a lot of growers who use a certain rootstock in all their situations because they know how it performs and they can treat it differently. If they plant this rootstock in this site, they know how to treat it and will do what it needs to.
Yeah.
And if they are planting it in this different site, they can do it over there as well.
Well, and if it's so impacted by region too, obviously if you have orchards in multiple regions, you can't just bank on one rootstock. Right.
For a long time, there was just a few. And so there was a couple options and they would just make it work. Mm-hmm. And now with so many options out there, sometimes it's a little debilitating to try to pick a rootstock because there's kind of the old knowns and they're kind of tried and true and you can really rely on what you already know about them. But there's new ones that may have some good benefits, but there's also unknowns associated with it.
So I always hear about older people saying that when the Red Delicious was first commercially produced, it was like a really good apple, right? And then over time, as the marketers, unfortunately, wanted to produce high color and high pressures and all that stuff, obviously we changed the apple and the tree. Did rootstocks play a role in that as we moved towards different characteristics of the fruit?
Most likely not. The rootstocks don't have a whole lot of impact on the fruit quality.
Okay, interesting.
There is some, but mostly it's the variety itself.
Got it.
So when they're selecting a redder apple, it might be redder, but it might not have the same Brix level or the same pressure.
Okay.
So there's gives and takes, and there's also it's kind of a known thing that you can change the taste of a variety. The change of a variety will change as you select for different attributes.
Gotcha. So like the Aztec Fuji being a higher color versus just a traditional.
Yeah, it's possible that there was a kind of a flavor change.
So I saw on your website you have your varieties thing, and there was 4 different Pink Lady strains. So right. So is that for different areas, or why would someone have 4 different?
A lot of it is for improvements on an older strain or some attribute that is kind of desirable. So there's the older Crips Pink, which is kind of the original Pink Lady. And then there's the Ruby Pink, which is an improvement on the Crips Pink. And so they call it a sport when they find it's a Crips Pink tree that has some improvement on it, better color or higher pressure or something like that. So that's what the Ruby Pink is. And then there's 2 early varieties. One is Maslin and one is Barnsby.
Okay.
And so Maslin was the first early one, and then Barnsby is kind of an improvement. There was some issues with Maslin where it would revert. So a reversion is when it kind of goes back to the original way it was. So
over time,
yeah. Really? And that happens a lot with galas, for example. It's a really red gala, but then 5 to 10 years later, it's kind of more green now.
Really? I've never heard that. That's interesting. Huh.
Yeah, it's basically just the DNA kind of degrading or reverting back to where it was before, or the mutation that was there kind of not sticking really.
Wow. So the Wildfire Gala is an early strain, but over time it might be pushed back later to line up with
Potentially.
with a current or a normal gala?
We haven't seen that so much with like wildfire, but that does happen. And so varieties will kind of fall out of favor because of certain things like that. But then you'll find one that maybe is more consistent, or you hope is more consistent.
Mother Nature always wins.
It does.
She's pretty cool. So you mentioned you do cherries. A big issue is obviously little cherry disease or virus, forget. How do you manage that as a provider of trees?
Yeah, so it's a pretty big deal. It's really
maybe explain what it is for those that don't know.
Yeah,
Sorry.
so Western X is an X phytoplasma which affects cherry trees, and it causes small fruit and kind of small sour tasting fruit. And little cherry disease is very similar, but they're kind of two different. I'm not no biologist, but
I'm definitely not either.
They're two different virus types.
Okay.
So it's a major thing for cherry growers because it'll take a block that's productive and profitable, and depending on the rate of spread within the block, it could be completely unprofitable and need to be removed.
So one tree could impact the whole site, basically.
Yeah. So specifically Western X is spread by leafhoppers. So it has one vector, which is leafhoppers, and it can spread by grafting.
Oh.
And so the grafting can happen whether it's root grafting, where two trees who are planted next to each other, the roots grow together, and then they become grafted together, and then they can pass that disease back and forth. And then the other is grafting in the field, where you're grafting a tree over to a new variety, or in the nursery where we're budding the rootstock to a new variety. So it's really critical to make sure that you're not spreading that through the grafting.
Yeah.
And so what we do in our nursery is use certified wood. And so certified wood comes from blocks that are planted specifically for the production of sign wood, not for fruit. So nurseries have their own sign wood blocks, and those are all administered by the WSDA. And so they're registered blocks, and the WSDA has them tested on a rotational basis to test for all sorts of different diseases or viruses that might be present.
Got it. So by controlling the source at the first stage, you're able to ensure it doesn't come down through the stream.
Right. Yeah. So we use all certified wood. And then as far as controlling leafhoppers in the nursery, we're using as many products as are available, different modes of action, to make sure there's no leafhoppers that are living in the nursery itself.
Do you ever see them? Like, is that working? Or
it does work. I mean, we see them every now and then. We have yellow sticky cards out there to kind of track if they are present.
Yeah.
But basically you can spray every 2 weeks. So we're doing that to make sure that, if they do get in there, they're not living in there long enough to be able to spread it. And then in addition, the other host for leafhoppers is a lot of broadleaf weeds. So we do clean cultivation in the nursery, so there's no weeds available for them basically there's no reason for them to be in there, because generally they move along the ground, and then they'll go from the ground on the broadleaf weeds up into the canopy of a tree. And so basically we keep it so there's no reason for them to come into the nursery at all.
Gotcha. And if they're in the orchard, as long as there's no contaminant trees, then it's not an issue, right?
Right. There is the issue of them bringing it from the outside, and so the Western X is known to be harbored in some native species like sagebrush or alfalfa or things like that. So that it could be in one of those sources, and the leafhoppers could be in an alfalfa field and then move into an orchard.
Good thing we have no sagebrush around here. So
or alfalfa. Right.
I didn't know that. Yeah, or alfalfa. Wow. So they can get it from just a native plant and bring it into an orchard. And if you don't catch it in time, that whole site could be wiped out.
Right.
Wow. It's a serious problem.
It's a huge problem. Yeah. And I think pretty much all the nurseries in Washington, and I think across the country really, for cherry production are aware of the issue with Western X and are doing a lot of hard work to make sure that we're not spreading it all.
Yeah. Have you seen, a little off topic, but they're training dogs now to smell and find that. That's insane.
It is. I was out there in a block while they were doing it.
You saw it?
Yeah, it is incredible. Yeah.
Dang.
I mean, I don't know how a dog can smell a virus, but it's verifiable.
Wow.
And yeah, they didn't start it with cherries, but they started doing it with citrus in Florida.
Okay.
And the dogs can actually detect the virus before it's detectable within the tree itself.
Wow.
So it's a pretty incredible process. It's
magic.
We'll see how far we can get with it. It's really promising right now. And then basically there's a proof of concept with 2 dogs right now. And then eventually, once it's kind of proved, there'll be more dogs trained so that they can cover more area.
That's awesome.
It is.
Man, I don't think my dogs could do that.
No, these dogs are hyper. These are not your normal pet dog. Yeah, these dogs are hyper focused.
They get trained on it somehow. That is a whole nother conversation. Is how do you train a dog to smell or to track that? That's crazy.
Right.
Man.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
So people have been growing trees for 100,000 years, probably. What is like a new area that you guys are researching or exploring at the nursery in terms of growing trees?
Well, honestly, the process of growing the tree really hasn't changed a lot for us. I think the big focus in the nursery and nurseries in general right now is probably similar to what the fruit industry, growers are growing fruit, is labor costs and getting cost of production down.
Optimizing your...
Yeah. So in the same way that we're looking at robots to pick fruit, I think there's also some effort in the nurseries. We are at least look at ways where we can mechanize a lot more of the jobs that we're doing so we can cut down on labor costs.
What are some of those jobs that you think could be automated?
Weeding is a big one.
Like the laser weeders. Have you seen those?
We have looked into the laser weeders. Yeah. I don't know if it's quite ready for...
I think they're fire hazards.
They're pretty incredible looking, but I don't know if they're ready for the size and like the nuances of what it looks like to actually grow trees, because they're mostly for row crops. Mm-hmm. Weeding, every process, it's pretty monotonous. So there's a lot of stripping off extra leaves or branches on a tree to make sure that it doesn't have any, your typical tree, you wouldn't see any kind of branches or leaves the first 20 to 24 inches. So that's all done manually. Tying trees. There's a lot of things that are just a very monotonous job that has to be done, thousands and tens of thousands of times. And if we can find a way to do that more efficiently, we can try to keep costs down for the customer.
Right. So it sounds like your labor has to be pretty skilled to make those precision adjustments.
Yeah.
So I guess how do you were talking about, the first 3-4 feet of the tree doesn't have any branches coming off. How do you manipulate that? You just literally cut them off and hope they don't grow back?
Basically a branch starts growing with just a leaf. So we start, once they start get above a certain height, once the tree gets above a certain height, you go through and there's a level where we don't want any leaves or branches. And so we just strip off those leaves by hand. Yeah. And so, they'll try to grow back again. Usually 1 or 2 times is enough to keep it from growing anything right there. And then by that time, there's no branches or leaves. There's enough branches or leaves above that level where the tree doesn't need to grow anything down below.
Gotcha. What about I haven't been to a nursery, so this is all new to me. How do you water them? What's your irrigation look like?
It's all drip.
Really?
Yeah. So we have drip lines that are we lay them out with the trees when they're planted, and they stay out there for 2 years. So they're usually on 12-hour sets 2 or 3 times a week, depending on the weather.
I assume they don't take much water at that size, or do they?
They take a fair amount. Yeah. I think 12-hour sets 2 or 3 times a week. I don't know what that is in gallons, but they take a fair amount of water. And it's interesting. Some cherries, for example, they grow really vigorously in the nursery. We actually will turn water off to them in July sometimes, and usually first week of August, and then don't give them any more water for the rest of the season until they go dormant, because they want to grow so much. We're trying a little bit to control growth on the tree so it doesn't get too big before we have to dig it and put it in storage.
It's crazy how even when they're adult trees, I feel like cherry trees just grow like crazy. My neighbor's pruning his cherry trees right now, and I'm always amazed at how much he takes off.
Right.
It's like
it is. Yeah.
it takes off half the tree, it feels like. And then every year it comes back and it's just as big.
Always there. Yep.
Is there any new, I mean, you said there's only a few rootstocks for cherries, but is there new work being done in that area to improve yields or resistance or anything?
There are. Yeah. I think there's always work being done on new rootstocks. I think there's a big effort right now within cherry breeding programs to find ones that are resistant to certain, especially Western X, little cherry disease 1 and 2. Basically, you are looking for a plant that's resistant, and then you breed that with another plant that might also be resistant or have other traits that you're looking for. And that's the same thing they do with the rootstock or any kind of variety, like eating apple variety, is you're looking for those preferable traits and then matching them up with other preferable traits.
Trying to find that perfect Michael Jordan rootstock, man.
Right.
It's out there.
Maybe. There's so many different climates and regions, soil types, that it's really hard to say that like this one's going to be, the perfect rootstock for all situations. Because where you might want a more dwarfing rootstock for really healthy, quality soil, and when you're a more rocky or sandy area, you're going to need a rootstock that has more vigor, kind of to make up for the competition it has in the ground.
And so do you guys ever like consult a grower who has 100 acres out and wherever, and they want to do something with it, but they're not sure what?
Yeah. Yeah. So, they'll ask us our opinion on different rootstock, and we'll go out and look at their ground and maybe give our recommendation, or reach out to a grower who maybe has similar situation and see what they've done that worked. Maybe get those growers together and let them kind of talk it out and talk out the details of what might work best for that situation. But yeah, I mean, we kind of have the ability to make kind of a cookie cutter situation for each grower and each block.
Yeah.
So it's not uncommon to have an order for a customer that has 3 or 4 different rootstocks, depending on where that block is going and what variety is going to be on it.
One of our cherry growers, the Durfee family down in Sunnyside, they just planted a cherry block, and Chelsea put a different variety, like every 20 acres was a different variety, so that their crew during harvest could like progressively go through that. And I thought it was super interesting.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if those were your trees or not, but I remember there was a nursery consultant that was there while they were planting it.
Right.
He was more invested, it felt like, than she was. He's like, God, I hope I got it right.
Right.
But it's pretty cool. So when someone buys trees, you're not just pulling them out of the ground, right? Like they're stored somewhere, or like, what's that process look like?
Yeah.
Say I wanted to buy 10,000 trees from you tomorrow. How would that work?
All right, let's do it. So this time of year, they are in storage. So the trees grow for 2 years. We would plant them in the spring. So like trees that would be delivered in 2025 this year were planted. The roots were planted in 2023. They were budded in the August of 23, and then they were grown all of 2024. So in November of 2024, when that tree is completely dormant, we make sure all the leaves are off of it. We do that by hand with some mechanical assistance, but mostly we have to do all the leaves by hand.
Wow.
And then we dig them out of the ground, grade them, bundle them up, put them on storage containers or storage metal pallets, and then put them into our cold room for the winter and through the spring.
Gotcha.
Whenever they get shipped out.
So you said grade them. There's different levels of quality, or what?
Yeah, so
grading?
we're, as we're digging them, there's going to be small ones, large ones. Some are going to have kind of a poor root system just because they were outcompeted or whatever, or maybe they got broken during the digging process. And so we grade them based on caliper is the primary grading. So a 1/2-inch caliper is kind of our standard large tree.
Gotcha.
And then there's smaller grades below that, and those are generally smaller trees that a grower may not want, or we'll just sell them for like a little bit less per tree. Then if there's any kind of root issue or branching issue, we'll grade those out as well. So basically we're kind of putting all the best trees together, and they go into storage that way, and that way the grower is getting a consistent type of tree in his order.
And so how do they get out to the orchard then from storage?
Generally through a refrigerated truck.
You guys like deliver it out?
We don't deliver it. The customers usually come and get them.
Up.
Yeah.
And they have to be reefered?
For the most part. Most of the trees are all stored bare root. So they are, they're laid horizontally on a metal pallet. So the roots are kind of facing out on both sides of the pallet.
Okay.
And so we water them every other day.
Oh, wow.
In the storage.
Wow.
Just to keep everything kind of nice, the humidity really high, keep everything well hydrated.
That's a lot.
And then because the trees are, they're still alive, they're just dormant. So there is a little bit of function going on. And so you keep those roots nice and wet all the time so they are remaining healthy. And we'll put them into a refrigerated truck for when they go out to the ground to be planted. Mm-hmm. And then they'll pull them off that truck and put them right in the ground.
And before they put them in the ground, they water the ground too, right?
Generally not. No,
really?
Usually it's early in the spring, so there's a good moisture content in the ground, but we will use a tree planter, put them in the ground, and the irrigation line is usually, or the drip line is usually laid out along with the tree, and they turn the water on right away.
Okay. I was going to say, when we saw that planting the Durfee cherry thing, they had irrigation going right behind the tree, like not even 50 feet behind the guys planting the trees.
Oh, yes.
The guy with the irrigation was coming through.
Right. Yeah. Because you're taking that very fine root hairs and putting it into generally dry soil.
Right.
And so it's just going to dehydrate it right away. So having water on it immediately is going to be most critical to a tree surviving.
And so the reefer is just to kind of bridge that gap between your storage facility and the dry dirt, basically.
Right. Yep. Yeah, we want to minimize the amount of time that it's exposed to any kind of warmer temperature or dry conditions before it's in the ground with water on it.
So earlier when we first started, you mentioned when people have to replace a group of trees, whether they died from, drought or whatever it was, a car hit them and they had to pull them out.
Yeah.
Are you able to match the exact rootstock and perfectly replicate those trees that were there?
Yeah. If the grower knows what rootstock was there and he can order the same tree, we can do that for sure.
And it's basically a 99.9% match of what was there.
Right.
In 5 years once it grows.
Yeah. It'll always be a little bit smaller. So if you had a 10-year-old tree that was, a few trees were knocked down by a tractor or something, you put a smaller tree in there, it's always going to be smaller. Sometimes in that situation, they'll plant a more vigorous rootstock in that spot so it catches up faster. Because it's always going to be competing with the trees on either side because, they just have a larger, more robust root system. Right. So it's always going to be kind of robbing any kind of nutrients and water that new, smaller tree might need. So you might put something more vigorous in there. So it just made me think of a question. I told you I'd come up with random questions. This is one of them. So overhead sprinklers were the standard for, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Every orchard was overhead sprinklers. And now we were just talking about drip irrigation. That's kind of becoming the standard. Did rootstocks have to change for that? Because I know with drip systems, they go straight down with the roots. Right. With overhead sprinklers, they kind of go out into the rows and stuff. Can the same rootstock work for both irrigation systems, or it can? It's not. I don't think they were necessarily a related change, but the newer rootstocks that are more dwarfing have smaller root systems. Okay. So their root system is a lot more concentrated right underneath the tree.
So they're better for a drip.
Yeah. So the drip system works effectively for that smaller root system.
Okay. I told you that was a random question, but
yeah.
All right. You got anything I need to fill in?
Yeah, you talked at the show and tell thing you did for us, just the skilled labor that is grafting, right, and how that might be not really, it's hard to teach. Can you kind of touch on that?
Yeah. So the grafting process is quite skilled in the labor perspective.
Are you a good grafter?
I'm not.
Really?
I'm not. Nope.
So who's teaching your labor?
Our other skilled grafters.
Okay.
Yeah. So our grafting crew, probably the average age is 45. Oh, wow. I'd say for the grafters. And we have some grafters that are probably 65 and 70. So, and they work a lot faster than a lot of younger people too. So, they're really motivated and they've been doing it for a long time. Thankfully, we do have some younger people coming into the company that are looking to learn to graft. It's a pretty specific job. There's not a lot of openings in it, in the industry. There's only so many grafters, and I think a lot of people know how to the basics, and there's a lot of growers who can either know how to do the grafting themselves and they can do it on a small scale, or they have a couple of people on their crews that are able to do it. But as far as covering, a lot of ground at a commercial level, it's not that common to have like a large concentration of grafters all in one company.
Sure.
Grafting isn't limited only to like the fruit industry. It's also happening in like the general nursery industry as a whole. So there's a lot of crossover there where like roses are propagated through grafting. And so there's crews that are in California or Oregon for grafting roses, and they'll come up in their off season to Washington to do grafting in the nurseries.
That's similar to, I guess, just contract labor too for harvest and stuff.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So the typical time to train a grafter is probably 2 to 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And that's giving them a ever increasing amount of, responsibility in the grafting process. And then kind of letting them go on their own to be, we call it we usually end up with like little teams of grafters. So there's a grafter and then there's 2 people helping that grafter to do the taping, the grafter is the one cutting and actually placing the piece of wood. Right. And there's people following behind that will tape those things into place, apply the wax and the paint to seal everything in. So we'll train that grafter for a couple of years. Usually they start out by being a painter or a taper, and then as they want to learn how to graft, they'll kind of make that known, and then they'll basically be told to make this cut, thousands of times. So they'll sit with a bunch of wood and just sit there and cut and cut and cut.
Wow.
And get, feedback along the way. But
I was going to say, at what point do you know they're ready?
Basically when they can make that same cut, make the right cut 1,000 times in a row, you can rely that they're going to do that right thing. And then, no one's immune to, making mistakes every now and then. So then, we have our grafting foreman who is always checking up on everybody, making sure, sometimes you can get into a mode and just get off a little bit at a time. So there's always some correction and some direction going on.
So if they have to be so precise, then obviously there's risk involved if they aren't precise. Like say they cut too deep or wrong place, can it like actually kill off the rootstock or like?
No, the real risk is just not having the graft take.
Okay.
So I mean,
gotcha.
If they're making the cut too deep or not getting enough material on either side of the cut, then the graft might not take, or it'll be kind of an incomplete heel, and then it just won't grow as well as it should.
Okay, that makes sense. Got it. So what's your take rate right now?
Let's see. It's probably averages around 95%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's higher than I thought.
We try.
Cool. Mine's probably like 22%.
Okay.
Huh. Did that answer your question, Brock? We need to get Brock a microphone. Oh, you have a microphone.
I have a microphone.
Hey, nice.
We're at 46 minutes, so.
Okay. Well, I like 55. That's kind of my target.
Okay.
Have I missed anything that you want to broadcast about your business?
Well, I think, a lot of growers know this, and the ordering process for trees, it's kind of changed throughout the years, where there was kind of a boom in planting. So there was always roots and there was always trees available. And so people wanted to, they can make a last minute decision, plant a tree. And that's really changed because plantings have gone down. Kind of the appetite for new development or CapEx has gone down. So now as a result, the nurseries are growing less and less trees on speculation.
Got it.
So, if you're a grower looking to plant trees, even if it's not this year, in the next 2 to 3 years, it's kind of in your interest to at least start a conversation with the nursery to kind of give them a wish list of what you might be looking for and try to figure out what that process is going to look like to get you the trees you need when you need them. The nurseries are fully aware that kind of money's in short supply right now for new plantings that cost, $50,000 to $100,000 an acre to plant.
Yeah.
But the nurseries are always looking to work with a customer that's going to be lead to success for both parties.
Yeah, you have to be able to forecast your need. Right. I mean, at a minimum, 12 months out, right? For your 1 year.
Yeah, for the 1 year and 2 to 3 years out for
ideally,
a 2-year tree.
Sure.
Yeah, making sure that you have the right rootstock to go with the right variety, and you have it on time. And you have a quality tree to put in the ground.
So what happens if, say, you miss your forecast? I know it has to happen at some point.
Right.
What happens with those trees?
Sometimes they'll get sold at a discount. Sometimes, and a lot of times they'll just get burned. So that's not fun for a nursery to burn trees, and it's a bummer also for a grower who maybe could have used those trees, but maybe wasn't aware of them, or just the funding didn't work out, or things like that. So, if we're going to minimize the amount of speculation that we have in the nursery, then that means there'll be less trees available, kind of at the last minute, for a grower to call and try to place an order of substantial size or so.
Yeah, that's got to be tough. Well, since plantings are getting less frequent, I think there's a lot more planning going into plantings and being selective about what they want to do at certain sites and knowing exactly what the plan is, maybe 2-3 years in an ideal scenario.
Right.
I don't think anyone's waking up on a Saturday and trying to plant on a Sunday anymore.
That's true. Yeah. And, it kind of ebbs and flows between the nursery and the grafting sides of things, where when a lot of new plantings are happening, kind of grafting is down. The field grafting or top working is down.
Yeah, right.
And now that planting is down, grafting and field work is way up, because there's a lot of kind of modern orchards that are planted with a variety that's fallen out of favor. Fuji's, older strains of Galas, things like that aren't really profitable anymore, but they're planted on good rootstocks with a good trellis system, with a density that makes sense to where you could just graft it over to a variety that will be profitable. So the grafting has definitely gone up in the past few years because of that situation, where there's no reason to take out this planting that was planted, with 12 to 1,500 trees per acre with a new irrigation system and a new trellis. Right. We can just take that, repurpose it, and put a new variety in there.
What do you think it costs, like, per acre to top work a tree?
It'll vary on the size of, like, how old the trees are.
Just a ballpark, because I'm thinking about if I wanted to plant an acre versus graft an acre, what's...
Yeah, so it's probably going to be about $5,000 an acre.
Okay. So a lot more manageable than a brand new.
Right.
As long as you have good rootstock.
Right. Or if your tree is healthy to begin with, and all the other architecture in there is kind of set up well for what you want your block to look like, it's a pretty low cost option in the grand scheme of things to be able to switch that variety over. And you can get with a mature tree in the ground, you can get into production within 2 years from grafting.
Right.
So it's a
faster,
fairly quick turnaround.
Have you just popped into my head with the 2-year turnaround thing? Have you looked into, like, biochar and how that's, like, speeding up some of the processes for like dwarf trees and stuff?
We have not done much with that ourselves.
Okay.
I know
someone just mentioned it to me, and I didn't.
I know there's kind of some studies going on with new plantings, putting biochar into the ground first, and then planting the tree and see if that increases production. But I haven't seen.
Okay, I didn't know if
it's proven out yet.
I didn't know if it was snake oil or not. It just seemed too good to be true. Like, instead of third leaf, how about second leaf?
Right. Yeah, I don't know if you'd be able to reach that level of increased productivity, but if your tree starts out healthier, maybe you'd have higher production in the third year.
So we were talking about third year, second year, third year, fourth year, but for pears it takes like 10 years, right?
Yeah, it's quite a bit longer.
Yeah. So I was up in Peshastin, and it was in a pear orchard. These trees were like 70 years old, and they're like dinosaurs basically. Right. But they said, why would I replant this? Like, this orchard kicks ass. Like, I'm not going to touch it for another 30 years. Right.
I think there's obviously less production across the whole industry in pears.
Yeah, there's less demand for sure.
But yeah, those pear trees, they'll just keep producing. There's a block across the street from my house. It was just taken out 2 years ago. And there was a section of the block that was, the trees were planted in 1911.
Wow.
And like a single tree could fill a whole bin, like a bin and a half of pears. So, they're really productive and they can remain really productive. They're with that big tree, there's a lot of labor involved in getting the fruit off the tree. But yeah, it's pretty incredible.
They're pretty hardcore. We have a picture of a pear tree that basically has a hole through the middle of the trunk.
Right.
And it has beautiful Bartletts on top and a hole in the trunk. And it's just like powering through it.
Yep.
It's amazing.
Yeah, they're solid.
Yeah. And
pretty solid thing.
Cherry trees are kind of in the same vein too. I feel like you definitely see more apple plantings and graftings than pears and cherries.
Right.
So, okay. Well, that's all I got. How you feeling?
Like real quickly, I think it'd be cool. Could you just like walk through what your guys' calendar year looks like as far as like what you're doing? Not too detailed, but just kind of like what each month kind of brings for you guys.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of in a typical calendar year for the nursery, January is kind of a low key time of year. We've already put away trees in storage for the coming spring. So they're in storage and have a pretty low crew count at that time. We have a couple people watering trees, keeping them healthy in storage. And then we'll have a crew also doing some cleanup in the fields from the previous year. And then we're also going to get into start cutting sign wood out of our sign wood blocks. February is kind of more of the same. We've shipped a few trees so far in February. A lot more sign wood cutting is happening. And then getting into March is when we're getting to our kind of prep for planting. So we're making sure the irrigation systems are ready to go. Our fields are worked, fumigated if we need to. Tree shipping is kind of picking up quite a bit in March. So our tree shipping season is really March to end of May or so.
Sure.
So, we're chipping trees every day in addition to everything that's happening in the field. We plant our new crop in April, first to second week of April or so.
It's a busy spring, dude.
It is. Yep. And around that same time is the crop that's still in the ground, because there's basically it's a 2-year crop. So we're planting one and then we're growing another one at the same time. That's when we're having to get in there, start weeding, start tree training, because the new bud that we just budded the previous August is starting to grow. So as it grows, we got to put in bamboo and then add ties to it to make sure it grows straight up that bamboo and is supported the whole way. That process is kind of April, May. Weeding is continuing all the way through tree training, June, July. August is when we're getting to the budding. So that rootstock we planted in the spring has grown for 6 months or so, and now we're ready to graft it to the variety that the customer wants it. So we're going to, graft in all our grannies and galas and Honeycrisp and Cosmic and things like that, whatever was ordered. That's August and September. Things kind of chill out a little bit as the trees start to go dormant, and then we'll start digging in October and November. And then we put trees in the storage. December and January are kind of clean up, break time, and then we just get right back to it.
That's a big calendar.
There's a lot of yeah. Then in addition to all that, that's just happening in the nursery. The grafting crew is from March to June out in the field grafting, in the orchards, and then they come back in August to the nursery to do the budding.
Will the grafting team actually cut the tree, or does the grower usually do that?
No, the grower does that.
Okay.
Yeah. So we, I'll go out there to meet with the grower on the project where he wants to graft. So I'll give him the advice on how to prep the tree for grafting, and then they do all that work themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you show up and just graft and. Sweet.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to watch a crew go out there and graft 20 acres in 6 hours or so.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Yeah.
What?
Yes. It's incredible. Yeah, we've got 15 grafters, and so it's a crew of about 45 people or so that go out there and they just blaze through.
Jeez. I've seen it, but I haven't watched it for the whole day, but it is impressive work for sure.
Yeah, and they're really hard workers. They're out there really breaking their backs to go, because they get paid piece rate, so it's in their interest to go as fast as they can. But they really put the work in. It's incredible to watch.
And a 95% take rate.
Yep.
Nice. Okay. Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for educating me a little bit on nurseries.
Happy to get my first podcast under my
belt.
First
one, man. I don't think it'll be your last. It's an interesting industry for sure.
Right.
So, thanks.